Good evening, everybody. This is Miss Jill Louise Starr, and I'm glad that you could join me this evening because I'm going to be discussing a very interesting topic. We're going to be discussing when Russia shot down KAL Flight 007 in 1983. I'm discussing this subject because my father was scheduled to be on that flight. The company that he was working for, Charles T. Main, CHAS space H space Main, was a company that was well known, involved in doing defense contracts for the CIA, the U.S. military, the IMF, and USAID. And thank God my father was called by his, quote, company, unquote, 15 minutes before the takeoff of that flight and was told to immediately not to get on the flight immediately, he was told. And he was told he was given another flight, which he told me was listed as flight number KAL-7. The flight that was shot down was KAL flight 007. In 1983, that flight was scheduled to depart from, I'm not sure where, probably Moscow, Russia. It was a South Korean flight, and it was scheduled to return to the United States, where I was waiting for my father. We've never really heard the summation of what really happened, and a few years ago, me and my father was visiting me here in New Jersey, and we were sitting in my room, and I know that my father was involved in a lot of interesting governmental projects, many of which I witnessed myself in Indonesia in the early 1970s. So I had nothing really to do. It was kind of boring and rainy, and so I asked my father if he knew anything about KAL flight 007 in 1983, because I told him when I was about 7 years old as a child and we were living in Syosset, Long Island, I remember how nervous my mother was pacing that night, back and forth on the floor like something terrible was about to happen. I was just wondering, I was curious whether he knew anything about it, and I don't know if it was a Freudian slip or not, but he said, Jill, yes, as a matter of fact, I was scheduled to be on the flight. My company, Charles T. Main, called me. They removed me from the flight immediately. They put me on a different flight, which was KAL number 7, and the United States was using that flight to spy on Russia, and it was raining that night. It was very poor weather, and the flight was shut down by Russia, and the United States denied it until today. As far as I know, they never stated that. I never heard any news report that, but that's what my father said. He said it was true, and he said he knew what he was just talking about. I was kind of shocked and taken by surprise, of course, that my father, no one in the world has heard anything about this. The United States here is denying having anything to do with spying, using that flight as a spy flight, because all the civilians were killed on that flight. And here my father is solving the mystery for me right in my room 2 years ago. So I was thinking to myself, my gosh, how cold-hearted can you get? I'm thinking, I didn't see any emotion on my father at the time. And I was thinking, my gosh, how could someone, take it so lightly or not have any emotion? I almost broke down in tears. And I said, all those civilians just died in the cold, freezing water. And the U.S. government did this. And he said, yeah. And I believe him because Mr. John Perkins, also worked for Charles T. Main, and he wrote a book called Confessions of an Economic Hitman about the many terrible things the company had been involved with during the time of their existence. They do not exist anymore, thank goodness. And you could watch some of his videos, and I suggest that you order his books. They're fantastic, and they tell very interesting stories that you wouldn't hear elsewhere. Me and my father and Mr. Perkins, who I've emailed once or twice, worked within the same executive circles within the company Charles T. Main. In fact, in the 1970s, we even stayed at the same hotel, which was in Jakarta during Suharto's regime, Hotel Intercontinental. I'll never forget it. I stayed in Indonesia about 6 months, and I've seen everything from going my father to have business meetings inside active volcanoes, to driving through a jungle for 20 hours and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, seeing a hotel, something out of a James Bond movie. It was so luxurious. But anyway, I just want to tell you a little bit of what I remember that evening when the flight was shot down, because I'll never forget it. I vividly remember my mother pacing nervously. I was 7 years old when she heard about the flight being shot down from the former Soviet Union in 1983. Why? My father was scheduled to be on that flight that night. The whole day my mother was acting nervous. She was pacing the living room back and forth. We rented a very large house, and her mind was just elsewhere. She was pacing. I'd never seen my mother pace back and forth like that, like she was scared something was going to happen. I asked her, "What's wrong?" and she replied, "Nothing." But obviously I knew there was something wrong with my mother. She was worried. My father was scheduled to be on the flight at the time. He told me just recently, 2 years ago, visiting me here in New Jersey in Bloomingdale, quote, "At the time I was scheduled to take the flight, I was called by Charles T. May, my company, quote, unquote, and they changed my flight immediately to KAL 7 before I stepped on the flight and saved my life." I told my father that I remembered him telling me this when I was a child, but now he begs to differ with me. Anyway, I remember him missing the flight because he told me a few summers ago that his company called him rescheduling the flight back to America from Korea, originally scheduled for that date a week later in KL number 7, not 007. So did my father solve the mystery insofar as why the flight was shot down by Russia in 1983? Well, my father won't admit it now. He says he doesn't remember discussing it. So we know that CIA agents and people affiliated with intelligence in America go to their death, and they're not supposed to even tell their families anything about their work. So there you go. I can only tell you what happened in our conversation, but my father is not known to lie. And like I said, 2 years ago, we were sitting around in my room, and I asked my father about it. I also remember him telling me that this particular jet, to the best of his recollection, was purposely invading Russian airspace to spy for the United States of America, who knew that there were many civilians and children on the flight, but they didn't care. It was bad weather, and Russia shut down the flight because it was fine, and everybody on it did die. My father told me the weather was particularly poor that evening. Sometimes our memories differ slightly, with a wink. If you ask him today, he'll tell you he doesn't remember the conversation, but it did happen. Just a little background. On September 1st, 1983, a Soviet Su-15 shot a Korean civilian 747 airliner from the sky, an airline I traveled myself personally with my father on many occasions. Very comfortable airline. All 269 passengers on board died. Korean authorities publicly stated the plane had mistakenly strayed off its intended course by, say, some 365 miles. I hardly think that's true. However, this was caused, they say, by technical error programmed into the internal navigation system in the plane's pilot. According to Korean authorities also. Unfortunately, the plane entered Soviet territory over the Kamchatka Peninsula, where there were several Soviet submarines located. And I want everybody to know in the world that the Kamchatka Peninsula is a territory that I've heard my father speak in business many times. So the United States was very interested in that territory, and it wouldn't surprise me at all if the plane was flying on it, because I've heard that word at home as a child many, many times. And where the submarines were located, on the night of the flight, they were scheduled for a secret test of the SS-25 Soviet missile reportedly was planned. A RC-135 spy plane was also in the area, and it assumed the Soviets believed they were destroying, or the flight 007 was up to no good and was going to destroy the submarines of the flight, RC-135, and it was a spy plane. It was shot down and everybody perished. In 1996, an interview in the New York Times showed it was an interesting article. I forget the person's name. He said the civilian airliner could have had a military use, and he believed to this day, his name was Mr. Osipovich, according to the interview, that the plane was used as a spy mission. And the serious fallout, diplomatic fallout between the United States and Soviet diplomatic relations ensued for many, many years. And I think until this day, it was never solved until right now. And I do believe I am telling the world the correct story. Thank you, and have a good evening. I would like to go back to school. I always get these ads that pop up when I go back to school. Well, I was thrown out illegally from Fairleigh Dickinson, Teaneck, New Jersey, and a new school for my political views. I'd love to get a job or work in some capacity if my doctor says it's okay. If anyone wants to give me a job offer, I'm all ears. Thanks.